The Collector. Chapter 1. The Discovery. It was nearly midnight when Officer Jenna Davis received the call. The words "possible homicide" crackled through her radio, sending a chill down her spine. She was used to disturbances at this hour, drunken brawls, petty thefts, but not murder. The location was a secluded house on the outskirts of town, where nothing ever happened. The house stood eerily quiet at the end of a long, tree-lined road. A single light flickered inside, casting an orange glow through the window. Jenna could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her as she walked up to the front door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitation gnawing at her instincts. She knocked softly, but there was no answer. Pushing the door open, Jenna's nose was hit with the scent of copper. The hallway was dim, the faint light from the living room barely illuminating the scene. And then she saw it on the wooden floor, a body. A young woman, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. There was no blood, at least not much of it, but something about the scene felt terribly wrong. As she approached the body, something shiny caught her eye. It was a small locket, gleaming in the dim light, carefully placed on the woman's chest. Jenna crouched down, squinting at the delicate object. It was open, revealing a photograph inside. But it wasn't of the victim. It was someone else, a different woman. Confusion clouded her mind as she pulled on gloves and carefully lifted the locket. Whoever this killer was, they weren't finished yet. The house seemed devoid of life. No signs of struggle, no obvious motive. But then, Jenna's eyes landed on something else. In the far corner of the room, a glass display case stood, its contents obscured by the shadows. She approached it cautiously, her flashlight trembling in her hand. When the beam of light hit the display, Jenna's heart sank. Inside were more objects, trinkets, jewelry, photographs, each item carefully arranged like artifacts in a museum. And then it hit her. These weren't just objects. They were trophies. Each piece belonged to a victim. The collector had struck again. Jenna backed away, her mind racing. The killer was building a collection, and now it was up to her to stop him. Can Jenna outsmart the cunning collector, or is she the next addition to his deadly exhibit? Keep reading to find out. Curious if the detectives will catch the collector? Keep reading to uncover the shocking conclusion. Chapter 2. The Profile. Detective Greg Lawson sat at his desk, his fingers tracing the edges of the crime scene photos. The collector had struck again, leaving behind yet another chilling display of personal artifacts, each item a stark reminder of lives snuffed out too soon. He had seen his fair share of disturbing cases, but this one gnawed at him in a way others hadn't. The methodical nature, the eerie precision. It was as if the killer took pride in every detail. Jenna sat across from him, the locket still wrapped in an evidence bag between them. "This was left on the victim," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the woman in the photo isn't her. I think the collector is taunting us." Greg nodded slowly. "It's his signature. He's not just killing, he's collecting. And each new victim is a piece of a larger puzzle." For weeks now, the collector had managed to elude capture, leaving no trace of his presence other than the macabre memorabilia. His victims varied: young, old, men, women. But one thing remained constant. He always left something behind, a calling card that linked each case. Jenna's frustration was palpable. How can he be so careful? He leaves no forensic evidence, no trace of who he is or where he's been. Greg leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "He's smart. He knows exactly how to play this game, which means we have to think like him. What does he want? Why take these trophies?" Jenna shook her head. "He's feeding off control. By keeping these items, he controls the memory of his victims. It's like he's preserving their essence, freezing them in time." "But why?" Greg's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. "The collector is more than just a psychopath. He's methodical, obsessive. and that means we can predict his next move. What do these objects mean to him? What's the pattern? He pulled a map of the city toward him, pinning it with crime scene locations. As the pins formed a rough circle, something clicked. He's working his way inward. Each murder has been closer to the center of the city. Jenna leaned in, which means his next target is somewhere near downtown. Greg's gaze darkened. If we're right, we don't have much time. The collector is escalating. He's planning something bigger. The office fell into a tense silence. They both knew that time was running out, and every second they didn't act was another chance for the collector to strike again. Greg stood abruptly, gathering the files. We need to brief the team. If we can predict where he's going to strike, maybe we can catch him before he adds another trophy to his collection. As they moved toward the door, Jenna paused, glancing back at the locket. A cold shiver ran through her. What if we're already too late? Do you think the detectives will catch the collector before his next move? Share your thoughts and stay tuned for the next chapter. What do you think will happen next? Don't miss the upcoming twists and tension-filled chapters. The trap. The city streets were unusually quiet as the squad cars took their positions around the target area. Downtown was an urban labyrinth of alleyways, crumbling buildings, and forgotten corners. Places where a killer could slip away unnoticed. Greg and Jenna sat in the surveillance van, tension hanging thick in the air as they watched the screens displaying various camera feeds. "He'll strike tonight," Greg muttered almost to himself. He always waits just long enough for the heat to die down. Then he moves in. He leaned closer to the map, which now showed the rough location of the predicted strike. Each red pin was a victim, and each victim was a step closer to this part of town. The pattern was undeniable. Jenna studied the feeds intently. He's smart, but he's not perfect. He makes mistakes even if they're small. Maybe tonight we'll catch one. She paused, her eyes flicking from screen to screen. Do you think he knows we're onto him? Greg glanced at her, his expression grim. I think he enjoys it. He's playing with us. It's all part of his game. A sudden flicker on one of the screens caught Jenna's attention. Wait, there, she said, pointing. A figure moved in the shadows near an abandoned warehouse. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark jacket, his face hidden under a hood. He paused, looking around, and then disappeared into the building. That's him, Jenna whispered. Her pulse quickened as Greg reached for his radio. Units, converge on the warehouse. The suspect is inside. Move in, but be careful, he's dangerous. The van's doors burst open as officers moved into position. Greg and Jenna followed closely behind, the night air heavy with anticipation. They approached the building, the sharp sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Greg signaled for silence as they neared the entrance. The door creaked open, revealing a vast, empty space. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through broken windows. The officers fanned out, weapons drawn, moving cautiously into the darkened interior. Jenna's flashlight scanned the area, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she saw it. A small table in the center of the room, and on it, a single object glinting in the light. She approached slowly, her gut churning. It was another trophy, a delicate bracelet this time, one she recognized from the latest missing person report. Greg's voice was barely a whisper. It's a trap. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the warehouse, and the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped them. Jenna's breath caught as panic set in. The sound of footsteps, rapid and deliberate, filled the space. He's here, one of the officers shouted. Jenna's flashlight flickered back on, just in time to see a shadow dart between pillars. She and Greg sprinted after it, their hearts racing as they weaved through the maze of debris. The figure was fast, slipping through their grasp like smoke. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he vanished again. Then, just as quickly as it began, the warehouse fell silent. The shadow was gone. Jenna's hand trembled as she gripped her flashlight. They had come so close, too close, but the collector had slipped through their fingers once more. leaving behind only the chilling reminder that he was always one step ahead. Will the collector ever make a mistake? Or is he always one step ahead? Stay tuned for more in the next chapter. Enjoying the story so far? Subscribe and share to make sure you don't miss the suspenseful moments ahead. Chapter 4. The Puzzle. The failure to capture the collector weighed heavily on both Jenna and Greg as they sat in the precinct's conference room, reviewing the night's events. The warehouse was nothing but a ghostly echo in their minds, its empty halls mocking their efforts. The bracelet, now sitting in an evidence bag on the table, was the only tangible reminder of how close they had come. Too close. We underestimated him, Greg admitted, his voice flat. He knew we'd be there. It's almost like he wanted us to find that bracelet. Jenna's eyes stayed fixed on the bracelet. This isn't just a game to him, she said quietly. It's something more. He's building to something. She flipped through the case files, her mind racing to find the missing link. The collector's victims, the trophies, they all meant something, but what? Each item told a story, a piece of his twisted narrative. But there was still something they were missing. Let's think about the trophies, Jenna said, standing up and pacing the room. Each one is personal to the victim. A locket, a bracelet, a ring, they're all sentimental items. But he doesn't take them as souvenirs. It's more than that. Greg leaned back in his chair, watching her. Go on. These items, they're not random. He chooses them specifically. He's preserving something. Memories, maybe? But why? Greg's eyes narrowed as he mulled over her words. He's obsessed with control. By taking these items, he's not just controlling the memory of his victims. He's controlling how they're remembered. These trophies are part of his identity. Jenna stopped pacing, a thought hitting her like a lightning bolt. What if he's recreating something? What if the victims are connected, not just to him, but to each other? Greg stood, intrigued by the idea. You mean like they're all part of some larger event? Something from his past? Jenna nodded. Exactly. If we can figure out the connection between the victims, we might be able to understand why he's doing this. They spent hours poring over the files, cross-referencing the victims' backgrounds. First, nothing seemed to align. Different ages, different professions, different social circles. But then, Jenna spotted something. A pattern buried deep in the details. Greg, look at this. She pointed to a section of one victim's file. This woman volunteered at a local community center. And so did another victim 2 years ago. What if this is the connection? What if all the victims were involved in something that ties them together? Greg's eyes widened as he scanned the files. You're right. Several of them had some connection to the same places, community centers, shelters, even schools. The collector is targeting people who were involved in some part of his life. But how? Jenna's heart pounded as she pieced together the fragments. It's not just about the items. The trophies are mementos of people who played a role in something that changed his life. But we still don't know what. Greg exhaled slowly. We're getting closer. The trophies, the victims, it's all leading to one event. Something traumatic, something that made him the collector. Jenna's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. A message from forensics. The results from the bracelet had come in. She read the text, her face going pale. Greg, the bracelet, it belonged to someone else. Someone who's still alive. Greg's eyes widened. A survivor? Jenna nodded. If we can find them, maybe they can tell us what happened. Maybe they know why the collector is doing this. Can they find the survivor in time to stop the collector? Or will he strike again before they uncover the truth? Keep reading to find out. Want to find out how this deadly game unfolds? Stick around for more surprises. Chapter 5. The Survivor. Jenna and Greg raced down the narrow hospital corridor, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off the sterile walls. The name they'd uncovered, the one tied to the bracelet, led them here. Her name was Marissa Evans, a woman who had seemingly vanished from the collector's pattern. Alive, but a potential key to unlocking his identity. Greg pulled up short at the nurse's station. Marissa Evans, which room? He asked breathlessly. The nurse blinked at him, startled by the urgency. "Room 304, she replied. "But she's heavily sedated. She hasn't spoken to anyone in days." Jenna and Greg exchanged a glance, knowing they had no choice but to push forward. As they entered the room, the dim light revealed a frail woman lying on the hospital bed. Marissa's eyes fluttered open briefly, her expression distant, as if haunted by ghosts they couldn't see. Jenna took a seat beside the bed, speaking softly. "Marissa, we're detectives. We need your help. You're the only one who can tell us what happened. The man who did this to you, he's still out there and we need to stop him." Marissa's eyes shifted, though her face remained impassive. It was as if she could hear them, but the weight of her trauma kept her locked inside herself. Jenna reached into her pocket, pulling out a photograph of the bracelet they had recovered. "Do you recognize this?" Marissa's hand twitched, a faint reaction, but it was enough. Her lips parted slightly, as if the words were trapped behind years of silence. Greg leaned in, sensing that she was on the verge of a breakthrough. "Who did this to you?" Jenna pressed gently. "Why is he collecting these things? What does he want?" Marissa's voice, barely a whisper, cracked the silence. He never stopped. He's still collecting." Greg exchanged a sharp glance with Jenna. "Why, Marissa? Why is he doing this?" Her eyes glazed over, as if reliving a memory she had spent years trying to bury. "It was an accident," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Years ago, we were kids. There was a fire. Everyone thought it was an accident. But it wasn't." Jenna felt her heart skip a beat. "A fire? What fire?" Marissa's breath came in short, shallow gasps, the memory consuming her. "At the community center. He was there. He blames us. He blames all of us." Greg's face tightened as the pieces fell into place. "The fire killed someone close to him, didn't it?" Marissa nodded weakly. "His sister. He never forgave us. He thinks we let her die. That's why he's doing this. We were all there that day. He's punishing us." Jenna's mind reeled as she pieced it together. The victims, they were all connected to the community center, tied to that tragic event. And now, years later, the collector was exacting his twisted revenge by targeting those who had survived. Every item he took was a piece of the past, a way to reclaim control over the memories of those who had been involved. Greg's voice was firm, pulling them back to the present. "Who is he, Marissa? What's his name?" Marissa's eyes filled with tears. Evan Carter." The name hit Jenna like a blow. Evan Carter, a name buried deep in the case files of the fire that had devastated the community center. They had never considered him a suspect, just another victim. But now it was clear. He wasn't just a victim, he was the collector. Jenna rose from the chair, her pulse racing. "We need to find him, Greg. Now." Greg nodded, already pulling out his phone. "We have a name. Let's end this." Will they catch Evan Carter before he claims his next victim? Stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion in the next chapter. Is the suspense getting to you? Stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter and see how the mystery unravels. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The address they uncovered for Evan Carter was a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. As Jenna and Greg sped through the streets, tension coiled in the air between them. This was it. They had the name, the motive, and now they were closing in on the man who had terrorized the city for months. "This is the place," Greg muttered as they pulled up in front of the apartment building. It was old, worn down, with broken windows and peeling paint. The kind of place where secrets could easily fester unnoticed. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as they exited the car, weapons drawn. They had no idea what awaited them inside. They moved silently through the halls, stopping in front of apartment 3B. Jenna signaled to Greg, and with one swift motion, he kicked the door open. The room beyond was dark and cluttered, the air thick with the smell of dust and neglect. But what drew their attention was the wall. It was covered in photographs, dozens of them, each carefully pinned in place. Images of the victims, smiling, oblivious to the fate that awaited them. And below each photo and artifact, the trophies Evan had taken. The scene was chilling, a grotesque museum curated by a man obsessed with revenge. Jenna's breath hitched as she scanned the room. This is where he's been planning it all. Every detail, every victim. She approached the wall, eyes narrowing on the photographs. They were all there except one. "Marissa," Greg whispered. "She's next." The realization hit them both like a punch to the gut. Evan wasn't finished. He had saved Marissa for last, and now that they had spoken to her, he would know. He would be coming for her. "We need to get to the hospital," Greg said, already moving toward the door. But before they could leave, a creak from the hallway froze them in place. Jenna turned slowly, her pulse quickening. There, standing in the doorway, was Evan Carter. He was younger than they'd expected, with an unsettling calmness in his eyes. He didn't run, didn't reach for a weapon. He just stood there, watching them with a look of cold detachment, as if they were nothing more than pieces in his twisted game. "You're too late," Evan said, his voice quiet, yet full of menace. "You think you can stop me? But you're wrong. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. They let her die. They all let her die, and now they'll pay." Jenna stepped forward, her gun aimed directly at him. "It wasn't their fault, Evan. What happened to your sister was a tragedy. But killing these people won't bring her back." Evan's expression didn't change. "You don't understand. None of you do. This is the only way to make them remember. To make them feel what I've felt all these years." Greg edged closer to Jenna, his voice steady but firm. "It's over, Evan. We know about the fire. We know why you're doing this. But this ends now. No more deaths." For a moment, Evan's calm exterior cracked, his eyes flashing with raw emotion. "You think you can just walk in here and stop me? You think it's that simple?" His voice rose, filled with fury. "You don't get to decide when this ends. Ido." Without warning, Evan lunged toward them, but Greg was faster. A single shot rang out, echoing through the small apartment. Evan crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had begun. Jenna lowered her weapon, her heart racing. They had stopped him just in time. Greg knelt beside Evan, securing him in handcuffs. "It's over, Evan. You're done." As the paramedics arrived to take Evan away, Jenna stood in front of the wall of photographs, her eyes lingering on the faces of the victims. So many lives, shattered by one man's twisted need for vengeance. But now, finally, it was over. Greg joined her, his voice low. "We stopped him." Jenna nodded, but the weight of the case hung heavily on her. "We did. But the scars he left, they'll last a lifetime." Together, they left the apartment, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of the lives lost. The collector had been caught, but the memories of his victims would forever remain. The end.